Hey there, Nick. What's happening?
I'm working on these graphics for Christmas, and I'm just stuck. I've been working on a blank canvas for more than an hour. I just gotta move past this.
You know what you should do? Try this. It's a prototype easy button from Church Motion Graphics. Should help with your little problem here.
This is a stapler.
And this is a sketch. That's a button. Hit it.
This is exactly what I needed.
Yep, they got like worship lyric backgrounds, slide presentations. They got new stuff every week. Anything you'd really need graphics for, they got.
Can I do it again?
Yeah, careful. It's a prototype.
Okay.
Yeah, and whatever your budget is, they have a couple different subscriptions for you to pick from. And with their premium subscription, you get access to the entire back catalog of thousands of weeks worth of graphics. It's a pretty awesome deal, all things considered. Hey, Pastor Doug, we're gonna need another video guy. Head to churchmotiongraphics.com and use promo code Blackbar to get $15 off for your premium yearly subscription. I'm not exactly sure why, but for whatever reason, animation, and specifically After Effects, is this weird, scary final frontier for a lot of church media people I've spoken with. They've got Photoshop down, they've dabbled in Illustrator, they even know their way around a basic video editor, but that thing? It scares me. My hope is that by the end of this video, you'll have a basic understanding of how After Effects works to feel confident enough to integrate it into your workflow. Today, let's conquer Photoshop for the fourth dimension by learning how to animate our sermon slides, lower thirds, transitions, and even custom stingers for our live stream. Welcome to Blackbar. Thanks so much for the Patreons who helped make this video possible. If you want to learn how to support the channel, check out the link in the description below. Hi, I am Caleb, and I have in front of me a kind of working proof of concept for the sort of thing we're going to be playing with today. You'll actually find this exact Photoshop file down in the description below if you want to follow along. We have a relatively simple lower third here for a incredible sermon series, obviously, coming up soon. The background for the lower third is actually an asset from one of Church Motion Graphics' recent packs that they dropped. I'm not usually the kind of designer to just take things straight. I always usually like to play with it to edit it. In this case, mask out the mountain and make a lower third with it. And I would encourage for everybody to play with this stuff. Use assets, but mess with them. Do something that's unique and specific to the sermon series, to the event, to whatever it is that you're working on. That's how creativity works. So the first thing we need to do is set up our Photoshop file to make sure that it's ready to be brought into After Effects. To do that, we need to make sure that the image size is the correct size that we'll be using. 1920 by 1080 works for me. And we'll need to make sure that anything that we might want to move or change or rotate in After Effects while animating is on its own layer. When importing into After Effects treats each layer as its own object, so if we want to treat them independently, we'll have to decide that now. I'm going to quickly break up a couple things to prepare for that. Wonderful. All right, I've got everything that I might want to move later on its own layer. Now it's time to just save it as a plain old PSD and open up After Effects. If you're using Illustrator to set up your lower thirds or your backgrounds or your stingers, it works exactly the same. Every object that you want to animate, you need to make sure it's on its own separate layer. I apologize if you can hear my laptop spinning up. The fans are a little bit loud, but there's not much we can do about it right now, so sorry. Now that we're in After Effects, all I'm gonna do is go to File, Import, File, and go find that lower third file. Once you hit OK, you're gonna see this dialog box pop up. All you're gonna wanna do is make sure in the import kind, you set the setting to composition, retain layer sizes, and hit OK. Now, the Photoshop file has been imported as a composition in our project library over here. In order to start animating, all we need to do is double click. Now you'll see down here that all of the layers that we had have been imported as individual layers in After Effects. I can grab any of them individually and start moving around just like I was in Photoshop. One thing we need to do before we start animating is making sure that the entire timeline is around the length of time that we need. For this, I'm just going to be animating the lower third coming in, which should only take a couple seconds. To edit the length of the timeline, all we need to do is go to Composition, Settings, and change the time right here. 8 seconds is a little long for me, so I'm gonna bring it down to 4. So before we start animating, we need to understand the basic building blocks of animation, which are keyframes. A keyframe is exactly what it sounds like. It's a key or important frame. If you're watching a video like this, you probably already know that video is just a bunch of individual pictures playing very quickly 24 or 30 times a second in front of you. Back in the old day, if you wanted to animate something, you had to draw whatever it was, each frame slowly moving every time. Fortunately, in the digital age, we don't really have to worry about that anymore. All we have to do is tell the computer that on frame 0, we want a ball to appear over here, and on frame 20, we want the ball to end up over here. What the computer is going to do is interpolate in between those frames. Interpolate is just a fancy way of saying it's going to fill in the blanks. On frame 0, it'll be here, and it knows it needs to get over there, so on frame 1, it'll be here, and then 2 and 3 and 4, all the way through. Why don't we do a quick test to show you what I mean? I'm gonna turn off a lot of these other layers and just focus on the background layer. If I click this little drop down and go under transform, it gives me a couple basic controls that I can use to animate with. To turn on keyframes for, let's say, position, all I have to do is hit this little stopwatch. Whenever you do that, After Effects will automatically put a keyframe wherever it was that your playhead was when you hit that button. So now at exactly 0 seconds, After Effects knows that we want this background to be in exactly this position. So to add another keyframe, we need to move later in time, we'll say 1 second, and then move the background where we want it. I'm just gonna move it up. Now, if we move the playhead back to the beginning and hit space to play, the background moves up. In addition to position, we have a couple other really fundamental tools that we can play with inside this drop-down. Scale is another obvious one. We can move this up or down to scale it larger or smaller. Rotation is also pretty self-explanatory, and opacity is as well. The weird one here is the anchor point. At first glance, you might just move this around and think this is a different way to set position, and although you can use it like that, it's much more useful when we get into scale and rotation. For example, by default, with the anchor point in the center of the screen, if I were to start messing with the rotation, the background is going to rotate around the center of the screen. If instead I move the anchor point into the center of the lower third, then start rotating, you'll see that it rotates instead around the anchor point's new position. The same thing goes for scale. If I don't mess with it, we're gonna scale in and out from the center of the screen. If instead I move the anchor point over here, put it back into position, we're gonna scale in and out from that weird left point on the side. As strange as it sounds, 95% of the animations I do are literally only using anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. You can do so much with just these basic keyframes. I'm gonna spend a few minutes and use only position and opacity and get this animation in a place that I'm really happy with it. So I've got this basic little animation working, and I'm relatively happy with it. We got the background coming in from the bottom and the text coming in from the side. Now, as much as I think the motion is good, there's something really stiff about it right now. Everything is starting and stopping immediately. There's no ramp in between. If you think about things in the real world, very, very few things outside of maybe robots start and stop immediately. There's always a bit of a ramp up and a ramp down. After Effects gives us the control to add those things to our animation, and trust me when I say this is by far the most important part when it comes to having animations that look and feel natural. I'm gonna hide the text for now, and we're gonna play with just the background. There are a couple different ways to do that, but I'll show you the way that I like. Let's say for this background, I don't really care how it starts because it starts off the frame to begin with, but we want it to end by really smoothly sliding into place. What I'm gonna do is right click on the end keyframe and then go to keyframe velocity. This is gonna bring up a bunch of numbers. It can be intimidating, don't worry about it. All we wanna do is make sure that the speed on top for both the in and out are both 0 because we are coming to a stop. And the influence is where we get a little bit more control. If we want the background to move at a normal consistent speed for 90% of the time and then slow down in the last 10%, we set the influence here to 10%. If we want it to be slowing down for like 90% of the time, we set it to 90. I'm gonna set mine at somewhere in between around 50%. gonna change both the numbers for now and then hit OK. Now you'll see when I play this, we're sliding into place and slowing down, which leads to a much more natural move. I'm going to use the same effect on the text, and we'll see where we are after that. And with just a little bit of interpolation, we've got this really nice looking lower third intro. Now it's time to export in a format that your presenter program will be able to read. Head to Composition and add to Adobe Media Encoder Q. This is another intimidating program, but it's not that hard. I'll take you through the steps. There are a million different settings that you could play with in here if you wanted to, but I'm going to keep it really simple. Number one is the presenter computer you're using, a Mac or a PC. Let's start with Mac first. You almost certainly should be exporting in the QuickTime format. If it's not already selected, you'll find it in the first drop down here. The next thing you need to decide is if you need an alpha channel or not. An alpha channel is a way that an image or a video stores transparency. For example, for our lower third, we don't actually want a black background in here. We want to be able to see whatever video is going on behind it. If we turn off this background, we can see this gray and white checkerboard pattern is an illustration of the transparency or lack of opacity going on. Not every video format supports transparency, so if you need to use it for a lower third or stinger or anything else where you need that, you'll have to pick a particular setting. Specifically in the drop-down menu, Apple ProRes 4444 with alpha. That way when you save it, you'll have recorded the alpha channel and the transparency required in the export. If you don't need the transparency, I'd highly recommend going with something a little bit more space conservative like Apple ProRes 422. After that, just pick where you're spitting out the file to and you're good. If you're using a PC instead, I'd recommend going with the H.264 format. I've never worked with a computer that can't play an H.264 file. If you need an alpha channel though, you'll need to use the same QuickTime format we talked about earlier, Apple ProRes 4444 with alpha. And from that, all you need to do is bring the exported file into your presentation software. And we're gonna pretend like it hasn't been 2 entire months since we recorded the first half of our video, and we're just gonna keep going as if nothing has gone wrong. Now we're up here in our church's video production booth, and we have ProPresenter 7 pulled up here. This is a relatively simple process that should work well with older versions of ProPresenter as well. First, you're gonna wanna import the video, drag it in like you would any other piece of media. Next, right-click on it and hit Inspector. You're gonna wanna slide the playhead to the very end of the timeline here, and then click the button on the side that sets the thumbnail to the current frame. Then click on Properties and change the playback behavior to stop instead of loop. Make sure the end behavior is set to hold last frame so that once your slide animates in, it stops on the last frame. Now you can close this window and start editing the slide as if it were a typical slide background. I'm gonna throw together a quick dummy slide for us to play with. Now that we've got a simple slide to work with, it's time to actually animate the text on the slide itself. Now you might be wondering why we didn't animate this text in After Effects to begin with. Although you certainly can do that, I'm not necessarily going to stop you from doing it. What it does mean is that you'd have to animate by hand in After Effects every single text that you want to show up on this background. And while you might have the time to do that if you get slides ahead of time, if there's any changes come Sunday morning, you are not going to be able to do that fast enough to make those changes as fast as you could in ProPresenter. So although I encourage you to try animating the slide backgrounds, try doing animation for the text itself or any content in ProPresenter or your slide presentation software of choice. All right, select the text or whatever the content of the slide is, and then hit the build button in the top right corner. If you've worked with PowerPoint before, this is gonna work very similar. Hit build in and then select from one of the many transitions of varying quality that ProPresenter has at its disposal. Again, try to keep this simple. No reason to go to any of the crazier transitions in here. I'm just gonna use the move in transition. Change any of the parameters that you want, like the direction or the duration, and then at the very end, at the bottom of the screen, be sure that the start option is set to with slide. Otherwise, you'll have to click twice to get the text to appear on top of the slide. After that, set a delay if you need to, and then you should be ready to preview the slide. And that looks pretty good to me. From here, you can just duplicate the slide and start adding the rest of your text. Animation is an incredibly underutilized tool when it comes to drawing attention to your sermon slides and graphics during your Sunday morning services. I understand After Effects is a big hurdle that not a lot of people want to invest the time into, but I promise you it is worth the time to learn. If you want to get access to the assets we used in this video and you want a discount doing so, again, make sure to check out this video's sponsor, Church Motion Graphics, and use our coupon code Blackbar for 15 bucks off your yearly premium subscription. Thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Blackbar. If you haven't already, make sure to check out the Blackbar podcast, released every single week, where we go more into depth into the topics we talk about in these videos. In addition, if you would like to join the Blackbar volunteer team and help make content or help other struggling churches on our Discord, make sure to check out the link in the description below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.